In the dark heart of Manhattan, where underground bosses negotiate the city's fate behind closed doors, an ordinary woman accidentally stepped into the sights of the most dangerous man in the room, not because she did anything wrong, but because for 11 months he watched her like a man starving, silent, controlled, terrifying in his restraint. Then she laughed with someone else, and everything he'd buried came roaring to the surface. This is a story about a woman who chose truth over safety, and a man who finally stopped running from the only thing that scared him: love. Like this video, comment your city so I can see how far this story travels, and follow me to see how it ends. Manhattan at night glittered like a kingdom built on blood money and broken promises. Above the city, inside private dining rooms wrapped in amber light and suffocating silence, powerful men negotiated futures no one else would ever witness. Deals that moved millions, decisions that ruined lives, conversations that never officially happened. And moving through those rooms, invisible by design, was Celine Vale. At 28, she'd mastered the art of managing chaos without becoming part of it. She could read tension in the way men shifted their weight before voices rose, could predict disaster in the micro-expression that crossed a face 3 seconds before a glass shattered, could orchestrate luxury events so flawlessly that attendees forgot she existed the moment dessert plates were cleared, that invisibility was survival. In her world, being noticed meant being vulnerable. Being vulnerable meant being replaceable. And Celine Vale had clawed her way up from coordinating hotel banquets in Queens to managing private events for people whose names never appeared in Forbes, but whose influence shaped the city anyway. She was good at her job because she understood one fundamental truth. Powerful people didn't want competence. They wanted control. And the fastest way to give them control was to anticipate their needs before they articulated them, solve their problems before they noticed them, and disappear the second they no longer required a solution. So that's what Celine did. She anticipated, solved, disappeared, until the night Jae-hyun Seo walked into one of her events and made disappearing impossible. It happened on a Tuesday in February during a private gathering at the Meridian Club, one of those old-money Manhattan establishments where memberships passed through generations and the waitstaff had been there longer than most of the members. Celine was coordinating a dinner for 18 guests, all men, all speaking in low tones that suggested the conversation mattered more than the food. She was adjusting the lighting near the bar when the room changed. Not loudly, not obviously. But the air shifted like a storm rolling into warm weather. Men stepped aside without being asked. Conversations softened mid-sentence. Even the security staff, 2 ex-military contractors she'd worked with before, straightened unconsciously, eyes tracking movement near the entrance. Celine turned and saw him. Jae-hyun Seo moved through the room with the kind of composure that made people nervous without understanding why. Tall, lean, dressed entirely in black, tailored pants, fitted shirt open at the collar, no tie. His dark hair was pushed back carelessly, and tattoos coiled up his neck and disappeared beneath the fabric, like warnings written in a language most people couldn't read. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. He was the most dangerous. Celine could see it in the way people reacted to him, the slight hesitation before they approached, the careful neutrality in their greetings, the way they positioned themselves at angles that kept him in their peripheral vision. This was a man people feared, and he was looking directly at her, not casually, not professionally, deliberately. Celine's pulse kicked up, but she kept her expression neutral. She dealt with powerful men before, men who thought coordination staff existed for their entertainment, men who mistook professionalism for invitation. She knew how to handle this, except Jae-hyun didn't approach her. He just watched. Throughout the entire evening, while Celine managed service transitions and ensured wine glasses never sat empty, she felt his attention like a physical weight. Not aggressive, not intrusive, just present, constant, unnerving in its steadiness. When dessert service began, one of the senior guests, a real estate developer named Morrison, who'd had too much scotch, cornered Celine near the kitchen corridor. "You're very efficient," Morrison said, standing too close, breath sour with expensive alcohol. "I could use someone like you at my personal events, private gatherings, very exclusive." The implication hung ugly between them. Celine had navigated this before. The trick was staying polite enough to avoid offense, but firm enough to shut it down. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Morrison, but my schedule is fully committed through—" Morrison's hand landed on her waist, and before Celine could react, before she could step back or deploy one of the practiced deflections she'd honed over years of dealing with entitled men, a voice cut through the hallway like a blade through silk. Morrison. One word. Quiet. Lethal. Morrison's hand dropped instantly. Jae-hyun stood 3 feet away, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed. But there was nothing relaxed about the look in his eyes. Morrison cleared his throat, face flushing. Seo, I was just leaving, Jae-hyun finished. The car's waiting. It wasn't a suggestion. Morrison left, and Celine stood there in the narrow hallway, heart hammering, staring at a man she'd never spoken to who'd just intervened in a situation she hadn't asked him to intervene in. Jae-hyun's gaze shifted to her. For a moment, something almost human flickered across his expression. Concern, maybe. Or anger on her behalf. Then it vanished behind perfect control. Are you all right? His voice was lower than she expected. Calm. Almost gentle. Celine straightened. I had it handled. I know. The response caught her off guard. Most men who played hero expected gratitude, expected validation that their intervention had been necessary. Jae-hyun just looked at her like he'd stated a simple fact. Thank you, Celine said finally, because ignoring the gesture felt wrong even if accepting it made her uncomfortable. He nodded once, then walked away. And Celine stood alone in the hallway, trying to understand what the hell had just happened. Over the next 11 months, Jae-hyun requested the same event coordinator for every gathering he hosted. Celine. At first, she thought it was coincidence. High-profile clients often developed preferences. But as the months accumulated, as the requests became consistent, Celine started noticing patterns. Jae-hyun never spoke to her beyond professional necessity, never flirted, never touched her, never crossed the carefully maintained line between client and coordinator. But he watched her. And slowly, subtly, he began protecting her in ways so quiet they felt almost imagined. A silent bodyguard appearing near crowded exits when events ran late. A coat draped over the back of her chair after she'd stood outside supervising valet service in January cold. A careful intervention when a drunk guest got aggressive during a holiday party, handled so smoothly the guest never even realized he'd been removed. Celine told herself she was imagining the attention, that powerful men notice details. That's what made them powerful. But late at night, alone in her Brooklyn apartment, she replayed moments in her mind. The way Jae-hyun's gaze would track her across rooms filled with people. The micro-expression that crossed his face when other men stood too close to her. The tension in his shoulders when she laughed at something a bartender said. It felt like care. Dangerous, controlled, unspoken care. And Celine didn't know what to do with that. Because Jae-hyun wasn't just another wealthy client. He existed in a world she only glimpsed through careful distance, whispered rumors about underground business, connections to people whose names appeared in federal investigations, the kind of power that operated outside legal structures. Getting involved with someone like that wasn't complicated, it was stupid. So Celine built routines around the ache of uncertainty, morning coffee at the same Brooklyn cafe, Sunday calls with her younger sister Emma, who lived in Boston and had no idea the kind of clients Celine worked with. Gym sessions that burned off the nervous energy accumulating in her chest. Late nights coordinating flawless events while pretending the tension between her and Jae-hyun didn't exist. Because acknowledging it meant making a choice. And Celine wasn't ready to make that choice. Then Adrian Cross entered her life. Adrian was a sound engineer, mid-30s, charming in an easy way, hired regularly by the luxury event company Celine worked for. He had messy brown hair, an infectious laugh, and the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to fight for anything. He started flirting with Celine during a September gala in Tribeca. Nothing aggressive, just small comments, compliments about her efficiency, questions about her life outside work. The kind of attention that felt safe because it came without shadows attached. Celine didn't love Adrian, but she was exhausted from feeling invisible to the one man she actually wanted. So when Adrian asked her to grab coffee after an event, she said yes. And when he made her laugh, a real laugh, unguarded and surprised, she let herself enjoy it. They started seeing each other casually. Coffee dates that stretched into dinners. Late-night texts that made her smile. Adrian was uncomplicated in a way that felt like relief after months of navigating the minefield of unspoken tension with Jae-hyun. For 3 weeks, Celine convinced herself this was better, safer. Then came the West Village Gala. It was a private event for 30 guests, Hosted in a renovated townhouse with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking tree-lined streets, Selene had coordinated everything: catering, staffing, security, the specific playlist requested by the host. Adrian was running sound for the evening's entertainment, and Jae-hyun was attending. Selene saw him the moment he arrived. Black suit, no tie, that same controlled presence that made rooms rearrange themselves around him. He moved through the gathering with practiced ease, shaking hands, engaging in brief conversations that looked casual but probably decided significant things. She tried to focus on work, but her awareness of him was constant, magnetic, exhausting. Halfway through the evening, during cocktail hour, Adrian appeared beside her near the bar. "You look stressed," he said, grinning, which means everything's going perfectly. Selene smiled despite herself. "That's usually how it works. Take a breath. You've got this." He said it lightly, casually, the way someone does when they don't understand that perfection isn't luck. It's control maintained through relentless attention. But it was kind. And Selene was tired of being the only person holding everything together. So when Adrian made a joke about the pretentious wine selection, she laughed. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind that came from genuine amusement instead of professional politeness. Across the room, Jae-hyun froze. Selene felt it before she saw it, the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure, like lightning about to strike. She turned and met his eyes. For the first time in 11 months, the perfect mask slipped. Jae-hyun's expression went dark with something raw and possessive, something restrained so violently it became more dangerous than anger itself. His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists at his sides before deliberately relaxing. The look lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then he turned away, rejoining a conversation with two men Selene vaguely recognized from previous events. But the damage was done, because Selene finally understood. Every glance, every silent intervention, every carefully maintained distance, all of it had been real. And once she knew that truth, she couldn't unknow it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of professional competence and internal chaos. Selene managed service transitions, coordinated entertainment timing, ensured guests never noticed the small disasters she prevented behind the scenes, but she felt Jae-hyun's presence like a burn across her skin. At 10:30, when most guests had transitioned from dinner to lounging in the townhouse's upstairs library, Selene slipped into the narrow hallway beside the kitchen to check on catering staff. The space was tight, barely wide enough for two people to pass comfortably. Industrial shelving lined one wall, stocked with extra glassware and linens. The lighting was harsh fluorescent, completely different from the warm ambiance in the main gathering spaces. Selene was reviewing the dessert service timeline on her phone when footsteps approached. She looked up. Jae-hyun stood at the hallway entrance, blocking the only exit. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the party filtered through, distant laughter, music, the soft clink of glasses. But here, in this narrow service corridor, the air felt heavy, dangerous. "You laughed with him." Jae-hyun's voice was low, controlled, but the words carried weight that had nothing to do with volume. Selene's pulse kicked up. "I'm allowed to laugh." "I know." "Then what's the problem?" Jae-hyun stepped closer, not threateningly, just close enough that she could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid control in the way he held himself. "The problem," he said quietly, "is that I've spent 11 months trying not to want you, and watching you laugh with someone else just made that impossible." The confession landed like a physical blow. Selene stared at him, heart hammering, every careful defense she'd built suddenly useless. "You never said anything," she managed. "I couldn't." "Why not?" Jae-hyun's jaw tightened. For a moment, something raw crossed his expression. Frustration, maybe, or fear. "Because wanting you is selfish," he said, "and acting on it is dangerous." "For who?" "For you." The words hung between them, honest and brutal. Selene should have left, should have stepped around him, returned to the party, maintained the professional distance that had kept her safe for 11 months. Instead, she stayed. "What if I get to decide that for myself?" Jae-hyun looked at her like she'd just suggested something impossible. "You don't understand what you'd be choosing. Then explain it to me." "Selene, stop protecting me from decisions I haven't made yet," she interrupted, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "You've been watching me for almost a year. I've been watching you too. So either tell me the truth, or stop looking at me like this matters." For a long moment, Jae-hyun said nothing. Then he exhaled, slow, controlled, like a man finally surrendering something he'd held too tightly for too long. "It matters," he said quietly. "It's mattered since the first time I saw you manage a crisis without breaking. Since I watched you handle men twice your size with nothing but composure and intelligence. Since I realized you were the only person in any room I've been in who didn't want anything from me except competence." Celine's breath caught. "I come from a world you've only seen edges of," Jae-hyun continued. "The kind of world where caring about someone openly makes them a target. Where proximity to me means proximity to violence you shouldn't have to understand. I kept my distance because I thought that was protecting you." He paused, something almost vulnerable flickering across his expression. "But watching you with him tonight made me realize distance wasn't protecting anyone. It was just making both of us alone." The honesty in his voice cracked something open inside Celine's chest. She'd spent months trying to convince herself this tension was one-sided. That she'd imagined the weight of his attention, that powerful men noticed details and she was reading meaning into professional observation. But this was real. Complicated, dangerous, probably stupid, but real. "I don't need protection," Celine said quietly. "I need honesty." "Then here's the truth." Jae-hyun's gaze held hers, unflinching. "I want you in ways that scare me. Not because you're fragile, you're not, but because wanting someone gives them power. And I've spent my entire adult life making sure no one has power over me. And now? Now I'm standing in a hallway during a party I'm supposed to be attending, telling a woman I barely know that she's ruined my ability to pretend this doesn't matter." Celine stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating off him, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands remained carefully at his sides, even though everything about his posture suggested he wanted to reach for her. "What happens now?" she asked. Jae-hyun's expression shifted, something dark and hungry flickering beneath the control. "That depends on what you want." Celine knew this was the moment, the choice that would define everything after. She could step back, return to the party, continue coordinating his events with professional distance and unspoken tension, keep herself safe inside the life she'd carefully constructed. Or she could step forward, into honesty, into risk, into whatever complicated, dangerous thing existed between them. "I want..." "Celine?" Adrian's voice cut through the hallway, bright and oblivious. He appeared at the corridor entrance, smiling until he registered the scene. Celine and Jae-hyun standing close, tension crackling between them like live wire. The smile faltered. "Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Just wanted to let you know we're wrapping sound in 15th San." "Thanks," Celine managed, voice steadier than she felt. "I'll be there in a minute." Adrian hesitated, gaze shifting between her and Jae-hyun. Then he nodded and disappeared back toward the party. Silence filled the hallway. Jae-hyun stepped back, that careful control slamming into place like armor. "You should go," he said quietly. "Jae-hyun, this was a mistake." His voice went flat, emotionless. "Forget I said anything." "I'm not going to do that." "Then forget I'm someone worth risking anything for." He turned and walked away before Celine could respond. And she stood alone in the narrow hallway, heart racing, every certainty she'd had about her carefully controlled life now shattered beyond recognition, because Jae-hyun Seo had finally told her the truth. And Celine Vale had no idea what to do with it. Celine didn't sleep that night. She lay in her Brooklyn apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying the hallway conversation until the words lost meaning and became just sound. Jae-hyun's voice saying, "I want you in ways that scare me." The look on his face when Adrian interrupted. The way he'd shut down completely, rebuilt every wall in seconds, and walked away like the confession had never happened. Forget I'm someone worth risking anything for. At 4 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and made coffee. Sat at her kitchen table watching the city wake up through her window. Tried to convince herself that going back to professional distance was possible. It wasn't, because now she knew the truth. And once you knew someone wanted you, really wanted you, in the raw, honest way that scared them, you couldn't pretend the wanting didn't exist. Her phone buzzed at 7:30. A text from Adrian. "Hey, you okay?" Seemed tense last night. Celine stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I'm fine. Just tired. Want to grab breakfast?" She should have said yes. Should have leaned into the uncomplicated thing with Adrian, The safe choice that didn't come with shadows and danger, and a man who looked at her like she was both salvation and destruction. Instead, she typed, "I can't do this anymore." The response came quickly. "Do what?" "Us. I'm sorry. You're great, but I'm not in the right headspace for this." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Is this about that guy at the party?" Celine closed her eyes. "It's about me figuring out what I actually want. And it's not me." The statement landed without accusation, just resignation. "No," Celine typed honestly. "It's not." "Okay. Thanks for being straight about it." The conversation ended there, and Celine sat alone in her apartment, coffee going cold, wondering what the hell she'd just done. She didn't hear from Jae-hyun for 3 weeks. No event requests. No sightings at industry gatherings. Nothing. Celine told herself it was relief. That distance was what they both needed. That the hallway confession had been a moment of weakness they'd both recover from. But every time her phone buzzed, her heart jumped. Every time she coordinated an event, she scanned the guest list for his name. And late at night, alone, she replayed his words until they carved grooves into her memory. Work became her escape. She threw herself into coordinating a massive charity gala in Midtown. 800 guests, live auction, 3-course dinner, entertainment that included a string quartet and a surprise performance by an indie artist whose publicist had been a nightmare to negotiate with. The event was flawless. And Celine felt nothing. Because perfection without witness started feeling like performance. And she was tired of performing. On a Thursday in late October, her boss called her into the office. Marcus Chen ran the luxury events company Celine worked for, 50-something, always impeccably dressed, with the kind of network that could make or destroy careers with a single phone call. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Celine sat. Marcus studied her for a moment, expression unreadable. "You've been with us for 4 years now," he said finally. "Almost 5. And in that time, you've built relationships with some of our most valuable clients, especially in the, let's call it the private sector." Celine's stomach tightened. She knew where this was going. "Jae-hyun So specifically requested you for an event next month," Marcus continued. "His birthday. Very exclusive guest list. He's offering triple our usual rate." The room felt suddenly airless. "And," Celine managed, "and I'm asking if there's a reason you might want to decline." The question hung carefully neutral, but Marcus wasn't stupid. He'd been in this industry long enough to read tension between people. Celine could say yes, could cite personal conflict, request reassignment, maintain professional boundaries. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'll do it." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Yes." "Because if there's something I should know—" "There isn't," Celine lied. "Seo's a professional client. I can handle it." Marcus didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "All right. Event details will be sent over tomorrow. It's at his penthouse. Intimate gathering, maybe 20 guests. He wants you to coordinate everything personally." "Understood." Celine left the office before Marcus could ask any more questions she didn't want to answer. The event details arrived the next morning, November 15th, 8 p.m. Jae-hyun's penthouse overlooking Central Park. Guest list of 18 people, names Celine vaguely recognized from previous events, all men who operated in the same shadowy spaces Jae-hyun did. Catering preferences? Korean fusion menu, specific wine pairings, dessert course featuring traditional Korean sweets. Entertainment? Live jazz trio, low-key, background only. And at the bottom of the email, a personal note from Jae-hyun himself. "I understand if you'd prefer someone else coordinate this. Let me know." Celine stared at the message for 10 minutes, then typed back, "I'll be there." The response came within seconds. "Okay." Nothing else. No acknowledgement of what had happened between them. No reference to the hallway confession or the 3 weeks of silence. Just okay. And somehow that hurt worse than anything else. The weeks leading up to the event crawled by with excruciating slowness. Celine coordinated every detail with mechanical precision, confirmed the catering order 3 times, hired the jazz trio personally after listening to 4 different groups, arranged for specific flowers, white orchids, Jae-hyun's preference, to be delivered the morning of the event. She told herself it was just another job, but her hands shook when she reviewed the timeline, and at night she dreamed about narrow hallways and confessions that changed everything. Her sister Emma called 2 days before the event. "You sound weird," Emma said without preamble. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." "Celine, I've known you for 28 years. You get this particular tone in your voice when you're lying to yourself about something. Celine closed her eyes, phone pressed against her ear. There's a guy. Oh, thank God, I was starting to think you'd sworn off men entirely. It's complicated. It's always complicated, Emma said. Tell me anyway. So Celine did. Not everything. She didn't mention Jae-hyun's name or the specifics of his world, but she told Emma about the 11 months of silent attention, about the hallway confession, about the 3 weeks of silence and the upcoming event that felt like walking into a minefield. Emma listened without interrupting, then said, Do you want him? The question was so direct it caught Celine off guard. I don't know. Bullshit. You know, you're just scared to admit it. Emma, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I watched you spend 4 years building this perfect career, working yourself into exhaustion, dating guys who were fine but never actually made you feel anything. And now you're talking about some man with actual emotion in your voice. So yeah, I think you know what you want. You're just terrified of what wanting it means. Celine's throat tightened. What if it's a mistake? Then it's a mistake, but at least it's yours. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. Emma's job at a nonprofit in Boston, their parents' upcoming anniversary, a mutual friend's engagement. But Emma's words stayed with Celine long after the call ended. At least it's yours. November 15th arrived cold and clear. Celine spent the morning confirming final details. The caterer called at noon with a last-minute substitution for one of the appetizers. Supply chain issue with a specific type of fish. Celine approved an alternative without hesitation. At 3 p.m., she arrived at Jae-hyun's building. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a pre-war building on Central Park West. Celine had coordinated events in expensive spaces before, but stepping into Jae-hyun's home felt different, personal. The main living area was enormous, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park, hardwood floors that looked original, furniture that managed to be both expensive and comfortable. But what caught Celine's attention were the details that revealed the person beneath the public image. Books everywhere. Not decorative coffee table books arranged for show, but actual books with worn spines and folded pages. Korean history, philosophy, fiction in both English and Korean, an entire shelf dedicated to poetry. A record player in the corner with stacks of vinyl, jazz, classical, some Korean artists Celine didn't recognize. Framed photographs on a side table. Jae-hyun with an older woman who had his eyes. His mother, probably. A group shot of young men in their 20s, arms around each other, smiling with the kind of ease that came before life got complicated. This wasn't a showroom. This was a home. And somehow that terrified Celine more than the bodyguards or the whispered rumors or the danger she only partially understood, because it meant there was a real person beneath the armor. Someone who read poetry and listened to jazz and kept photographs of people he cared about, where he could see them every day. Ms. Vale. Celine turned. A man in his 40s stood in the doorway, Korean, built like someone who'd spent years in physical work, wearing a suit that fit too well to be off the rack. I'm Min, he said, head of Mr. Seo's security. He asked me to show you the kitchen and service areas. Thank you. Min led her through the penthouse, pointing out the industrial kitchen where catering would set up, the service elevator staff should use, the guest bathroom, the coat closet. Professional. Efficient. Completely neutral. But Celine caught him watching her with the kind of assessment that suggested he knew exactly who she was and what she meant to his employer. The caterers arrived at 5. The jazz trio at 6:30. By 7:45, everything was perfect. Ambient lighting set to create warmth without harshness. Music playing low enough to encourage conversation. Appetizers arranged on minimalist serving platters. Wine breathing at the right temperature. Celine stood near the kitchen, reviewing her checklist one final time when footsteps approached. She looked up, and her breath caught. Jae-hyun stood in the hallway, dressed in black pants and a charcoal shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, exposing the tattoos that wound up his forearms. His hair was still damp from a recent shower. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes suggesting sleep had been as elusive for him as it had been for Celine. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jae-hyun said quietly, "Thank you for coming. It's my job. Is that the only reason you're here?" The question landed with surgical precision. Celine could have deflected, could have maintained professional distance, kept the conversation safely neutral. Instead, she met his eyes. No. Something shifted in Jae-hyun's expression. relief, maybe, or fear. Celine! The doorbell rang. Jae-hyun's jaw tightened. For a second, frustration flickered across his face. Then the mask slammed back into place. "We'll talk later," he said. It wasn't a question. Celine nodded, and Jae-hyun walked away to greet his guests. The evening unfolded with the kind of controlled chaos Celine had orchestrated 100 times before. Guests arrived in clusters. Min and 2 other security personnel managed entry with practiced efficiency. Celine coordinated service timing, ensured wine glasses stayed filled, handled a minor crisis when one of the appetizer platters slipped and had to be quickly replaced. But beneath the professional competence, she was hyper-aware of Jae-hyun, the way he moved through the room, greeting guests with careful warmth, the way men deferred to him without him having to demand it, the quiet authority in his posture that suggested he could command violence without ever raising his voice, and the way his gaze kept finding her. Not constantly, not obviously, but enough that Celine felt it like heat across her skin. Around 9:30, disaster struck. One of the catering staff, a young woman, maybe 22, new to the company, was carrying a tray of champagne glasses through the main living area when she stumbled. The tray tilted. 8 crystal flutes shattered across the hardwood floor in an explosion of glass and expensive alcohol. The room went silent. The young woman froze, face draining of color. In circles like this, mistakes weren't just embarrassing, they were career-ending. Celine moved immediately, crossing the room with calm efficiency. "It's fine," she said quietly to the trembling catering staffer. "Go to the kitchen. I'll handle this." Then she knelt and started picking up the larger pieces of broken glass, careful to avoid the sharp edges. And Jae-hyun stunned everyone in the room by kneeling beside her. Conversation stopped completely, because men like Jae-hyun Seo didn't kneel, didn't clean up messes, didn't participate in the kind of service work that existed beneath their station. But here he was, picking up shattered glass alongside his event coordinator like it was the most natural thing in the world. Min appeared with a broom and dustpan within seconds. "Sir, we'll handle this." "It's fine," Jae-hyun said quietly, not looking up. He handed Celine a cloth napkin for the champagne soaking into the floor. Their fingers brushed, and Celine felt the contact like an electric shock. Around them, guests had resumed conversation, but the energy in the room had shifted. People were watching now, noticing, because this wasn't professional courtesy. This was intimacy. Once the glass was cleared and the floor cleaned, Jae-hyun stood and offered Celine his hand. She took it, let him pull her to her feet, and for just a second, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating off him, Celine saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. Then it vanished. Jae-hyun released her hand and returned to his guests, but the damage was done. Because everyone in that room had just witnessed their employer, a man known for ruthless control, show care for someone who was supposed to be invisible. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Celine managed dessert service, coordinated the jazz trio's final set, began overseeing breakdown and cleanup as guests started leaving around 11. By midnight, the penthouse was empty, except for Celine, the catering staff finishing final cleanup, and Min conducting a security sweep. Celine was reviewing the invoice in the kitchen when Jae-hyun appeared in the doorway. "Can we talk?" His voice was quiet, careful. Celine's pulse kicked up, but she kept her expression neutral. "The staff needs another 20 minutes. "Min will handle it, please." The please landed with unexpected weight. Celine set down the invoice and followed Jae-hyun through the penthouse to a room she hadn't seen during the initial walkthrough, his study. It was smaller than the main living area, lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive desk that looked antique. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Central Park lit up against the night sky. Jae-hyun closed the door behind them, and suddenly the space felt very small. "You didn't have to do that," Celine said, breaking the silence. "Cleaning up the glass." "I know." "Your guests noticed." "I know," Jae-hyun repeated, then added quietly, "I didn't care." Celine's breath caught. Jae-hyun crossed to the window, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. For a long moment, he just stared out at the city. Then he spoke without turning around. "I've been watching you for almost a year," he said, "not because I wanted to make you uncomfortable, but because from the first time I saw you handle a crisis without breaking, I couldn't stop." He paused. "You want to know the truth about me? About why I kept my distance?" "Yes." Jae-hyun finally turned to face her. and Celine saw exhaustion in his expression, resignation, the look of someone who'd been holding something too heavy for too long and finally decided to set it down. I came to this country when I was 17, he said, alone, broke, barely spoke English. I worked construction jobs that paid under the table, slept in rooms with 6 other people, survived on convenience store food and stubbornness. His jaw tightened. By the time I was 22, I'd learned that the world doesn't reward kindness. It rewards strength, control, the willingness to do things other people won't. Celine listened without interrupting. I built what I have now through loyalty and violence in equal measure, Jae-hyun continued. I don't apologize for that. The men you saw tonight, they respect me because I've proven I'll protect what's mine and destroy what threatens it. That's the world I exist in. He took a step closer. And then you walked into one of my events and managed a crisis with nothing but composure and intelligence, and I realized I'd spent so long building armor, I'd forgotten what it felt like to want something soft. The word landed like a confession. Soft. You're not soft, Celine said quietly. No. But wanting you makes me feel like I am, and in my world, softness gets people killed. So you kept your distance. I tried. Jae-hyun's expression shifted, frustration bleeding through. For 11 months, I tried. Told myself that watching from far away was enough, that protecting you from a distance was the same as caring about you. But it wasn't. No, it was just cowardice dressed up as nobility. The honesty in his voice cracked something open in Celine's chest. She'd spent weeks trying to convince herself that Jae-hyun was dangerous, that getting involved with him was stupid, that the smart choice was walking away. But standing here, listening to him strip away every defense, she realized something fundamental. She didn't want the smart choice. She wanted the honest one. What changed? She asked. 3 weeks ago you walked away, told me to forget you said anything, and now I'm done pretending distance protects anyone, Jae-hyun interrupted. Seeing you with him at that party destroyed the illusion that staying away from you was keeping you safe. All it was doing was making both of us alone. He stepped closer. Close enough that Celine could see the tension in his jaw, the careful control in the way he held himself. So here's the truth, Jae-hyun said quietly. I want you, not as a transaction, not as something I own, but as someone I choose every day, knowing full well that choice makes me vulnerable in ways I've spent my entire adult life avoiding. Celine's heart hammered against her ribs. And if I don't want that, she asked, testing, then I'll handle it like an adult and we'll go back to professional distance. Just like that? No, not just like that. It'll be miserable, and I'll probably resent every man who gets close to you for the rest of my life. But I'll respect your choice. The answer was so honest, it hurt. Celine took a breath, then stepped forward, close enough to feel the heat radiating off him, close enough to see his pupils dilate, his breath catch, his hands curl into fists at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. I broke things off with Adrian, she said quietly. Jae-hyun's expression shifted. Why? Because he wasn't what I wanted. And what do you want? Celine held his gaze. I want the truth. I want honesty, even when it's ugly. I want someone who sees me as competent instead of fragile. And I want to stop pretending this tension between us doesn't exist. For a moment, Jae-hyun didn't move. Then his hand came up slow and deliberate, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, his palm cupped her jaw with devastating gentleness. If we do this, he said quietly, it won't be easy. My world is complicated, dangerous. There are things I can't tell you and places I can't take you. People will judge you for being with me. Some will try to use you to get to me. I know. And you're still standing here. Yes. Jae-hyun's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, barely a touch, but it sent heat flooding through her entire body. Why? He asked. Because I'm tired of playing it safe. And because you looked at me like I mattered for 11 months before you ever said a word. That's not nothing. Something raw flickered across Jae-hyun's expression. Then he leaned in and kissed her. Not aggressively, not desperately, but with the kind of controlled intensity that suggested he'd been imagining this moment for months and was determined to make it real. Celine kissed him back without hesitation and felt 11 months of tension finally break open. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jae-hyun rested his forehead against hers. This changes everything, he said quietly. I know. There's no going back from here. Celine's hand came up, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. Good. And in that moment, standing in Jae-hyun's study with the city glittering beyond the windows and her heart hammering in her chest, Celine made a choice she couldn't unmake. She chose risk over safety, honesty over distance, him over everything else. Whatever came next, there was no turning back. Their first real date happened 3 days later in a hidden Italian restaurant in the West Village that didn't have a sign and required a password to enter. Celine had expected something expensive and flashy, the kind of place powerful men took women to impress them. What she got instead was a cramped basement space with exposed brick walls, mismatched chairs, and a menu handwritten in Italian that changed daily based on whatever the chef felt like making. Jae-hyun knew the owner, an elderly woman named Rosa who kissed both his cheeks and called him ragazzo while swatting his arm affectionately. She seated them at a corner table partially hidden behind a wine rack, brought them wine without asking what they wanted, and disappeared into the kitchen muttering in rapid Italian. She doesn't like strangers, Jae-hyun said, watching Selena's expression. The fact that she let you in means she's decided you're acceptable. That's comforting. It should be. Rosa's instincts are better than most security systems. The wine was incredible. The food even better. But what caught Celine off guard was how different Jae-hyun seemed without the armor of professional distance. He still carried tension in his shoulders. That probably never went away completely. But he smiled more easily, asked questions that suggested he actually wanted to know her answers, told stories about arriving in New York as a broke teenager with nothing but stubbornness and a willingness to work construction jobs that paid under the table. I lived in a room with 6 other guys in Flushing, he said, tearing bread with his hands. We rotated sleeping shifts because there weren't enough beds. I'd work 16-hour days, come back exhausted, and still couldn't sleep because someone was always snoring or arguing or cooking something that smelled terrible. How long did that last? 2 years? Then I got smart. Smart how? Jae-hyun's expression shifted, something harder sliding beneath the surface. I realized the world doesn't reward hard work. It rewards leverage. So I started paying attention to who had power and how they used it. Started making myself useful to people who could open doors. Learned that loyalty and violence were currencies more valuable than money. The honesty in his voice was brutal. You're not going to romanticize it, Celine observed. No. Because it wasn't romantic, it was survival. I did things I'm not proud of, hurt people who probably didn't deserve it, made choices that seemed necessary at the time and still keep me awake some nights. He met her eyes directly. I need you to understand that about me. I'm not a good man trying to overcome a rough past. I'm someone who learned early that power protects you and weakness destroys you, and I've built my entire life around that principle. Most people would have softened the truth, made themselves more palatable. Jae-hyun didn't. And somehow that made Celine want him more. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Because if we're doing this, you deserve to know what you're choosing. I won't lie to you about who I am just to keep you around. Celine reached across the table, laced her fingers through his. I'm not looking for a fairy tale. I'm looking for someone honest enough to tell me the truth, even when it's ugly. Jae-hyun's hand tightened around hers, and for the first time since she'd met him, Celine saw something vulnerable flash across his expression. Relief, maybe. Or fear that this was real. They stayed at the restaurant until Rosa kicked them out at midnight, insisting they were keeping her from closing. Jae-hyun paid in cash, a thick stack of bills he handed over without counting. Rosa kissed his cheeks again and told Celine in heavily accented English that she'd better take care of her boy, or Rosa would hunt her down personally. Outside, the November air was cold enough to sting. This ceci. Jae-hyun shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over Celine's shoulders without asking if she needed it. The gesture was so automatic it felt like instinct. They walked through the West Village without destination, just moving through quiet streets while the city settled into its late-night rhythm. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Jae-hyun said suddenly. Celine glanced at him. Why? Because I want to know you, not the professional version, the real one. She considered deflecting, then decided honesty deserved honesty. I'm terrified of becoming invisible, she said quietly. Of spending my entire life being competent and useful and completely forgettable. I chose event coordination because I was good at it, but somewhere along the way, I realized I'd built a career around making other people's moments memorable while having none of my own. Jae-hyun listened without interrupting, And the worst part, Celine continued, is that I'm comfortable with it. I know how to be invisible, how to anticipate needs and solve problems and disappear the second I'm no longer necessary. It's safe, but it's also slowly erasing me. She stopped walking, turned to face him. You asked me once why I stayed when you told me the truth about wanting me. That's why. Because you looked at me for 11 months like I was the only person in the room who mattered, and I'd spent so long being invisible that someone finally seeing me felt like oxygen. Jae-hyun's expression went very still. Then he stepped closer, cupped her face with both hands, and kissed her with an intensity that stole her breath. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. You're not invisible, he said quietly. Not to me, not ever. And Celine believed him. The next 6 weeks unfolded in a rhythm Celine had never experienced before. Jae-hyun was gone more than he was present. Entire days where he disappeared into whatever dangerous business he conducted, returning late at night with exhaustion carved into his features and tension radiating off him like heat. He never explained where he'd been, and Celine learned not to ask. But when he was present, he was completely there. No phone calls during dinner, no distracted half-attention, just focus that felt almost overwhelming in its intensity. They fell into patterns. Sunday mornings at Celine's apartment with coffee and books spread across her kitchen table. Jae-hyun reading Korean history while Celine worked through event proposals, their legs tangled together beneath the table in comfortable silence. Late-night conversations in his penthouse where he told her stories about Korea, the grandmother who raised him, the streets of Seoul he'd walked as a kid, the specific smell of street food he still craved on cold nights. Quiet moments where words weren't necessary. His hand on the small of her back while they walked through the city. Her fingers tracing the tattoos on his forearms while they watched movies neither of them paid attention to. The gradual merging of two people who'd spent most of their lives surviving alone. But tension followed them everywhere. The way men watched Jae-hyun in restaurants, assessing threat levels and escape routes. The bodyguards who appeared at careful distances whenever they went out. The phone calls at 3 a.m. that pulled him out of bed with apologies in his eyes and promises to explain later that never quite materialized. Celine told herself she could handle it, that loving someone complicated meant accepting the complications. But late at night, alone in her apartment, doubt crept in through the cracks. Because she didn't fully understand Jae-hyun's world. And what you didn't understand could destroy you. The breaking point came on a frozen January night. Celine was coordinating a charity gala in Midtown, black tie event for 300 guests, live auction, dinner service that required military precision to execute properly. She'd been on her feet for 12 hours, managing crises and ensuring everything ran flawlessly. Around 9 p.m. during the auction, her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. She almost ignored it, then saw the message preview. You should ask Jae-hyun about the Rivers deal. Celine's stomach dropped. She stepped into a quiet hallway and opened the full message. 3 weeks ago, your boyfriend ordered a hit on Marcus Rivers, real estate developer who refused to sell property Jae-hyun wanted. Rivers is in critical condition at Mount Sinai. The police are investigating, but they won't find anything because Jae-hyun's good at making evidence disappear. Thought you should know who you're sleeping with. No signature, no additional context, just brutal information delivered like a knife to the ribs. Celine's hands shook. She knew Jae-hyun wasn't a good man. He'd told her that explicitly, had warned her his world was violent and complicated. But this was different. This was specific, real, the kind of violence that left people broken in hospital beds, and she'd been naive enough to think loving him kept her separate from it. She tried to focus on work, managed the rest of the evening on autopilot, coordinating final auction items, and overseeing breakdown with mechanical precision. But the message burned in her pocket like acid. At 11:30, she called Jae-hyun. He answered on the second ring. Hey, how was the event? Fine. Her voice came out flat. Can you come over? A pause. Now? Yes. Celine, what's wrong? Just come over, please. She heard him exhale. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Celine hung up and stared at her phone. At the message that had just shattered every illusion she'd built about managing the complications of loving someone dangerous. Jae-hyun arrived in 18 minutes. Celine let him into her apartment without speaking, watched him take in her expression, the exhaustion, the fear, the anger simmering beneath carefully maintained control. What happened? He asked quietly. Celine handed him her phone, showed him the message. Jae-hyun read it without expression. Then his jaw tightened, eyes going cold in a way that made him look terrifyingly unfamiliar. Who sent this? I don't know. That's not the point. It's exactly the point. Is it true? Celine interrupted. Silence filled the apartment. Jae-hyun looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. Yes. The confirmation landed like a physical blow. Celine had expected denial. Expected him to explain it away, contextualize it, make it sound less brutal than it was. Instead, he just admitted it. Rivers refused to sell, Jae-hyun said, voice carefully neutral. The property was essential for a development project involving multiple investors. He was leveraging the situation to extort additional money. I gave him 3 opportunities to negotiate reasonably. He refused all of them. So you had him beaten? I had him warned. He's in critical condition. The warning was supposed to be non-lethal. Jae-hyun's expression remained controlled, but frustration bled through. Someone exceeded their instructions. I've handled that situation. Celine stared at him. You're talking about this like it's a business transaction. Because in my world it is. A man is in the hospital. A man who tried to extort millions from people who don't respond well to extortion. Jae-hyun stepped closer. I'm not defending it, but I'm not apologizing for it either. This is what I told you about. This is the world I exist in. And you just expected me to accept that? I expected you to understand that power doesn't operate on morality. It operates on consequences. The coldness in his voice sent ice through Celine's veins. Because this wasn't the man who read poetry and listened to jazz. This wasn't the person who knelt beside her to clean up broken glass at his own birthday party. This was someone else entirely. Someone capable of ordering violence without hesitation. Did you know this would happen when you kissed me? Celine asked quietly. When you told me you wanted me. I knew my world would eventually touch you in ways you wouldn't like. That's not an answer. Jae-hyun's jaw tightened. Yes, I knew. And I chose you anyway because I'm selfish enough to want something good, even if it means dragging it into darkness. The honesty was brutal. Celine felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Get out. Celine, get out of my apartment. Jae-hyun didn't move. We need to talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. You just admitted you're selfish enough to pull me into your world knowing it would destroy me. That's not love, that's ownership. It's not. Get out. For a moment, Jae-hyun looked like he might argue. Then something shifted in his expression. Resignation, maybe. Or acceptance that he'd finally pushed too far. He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the knob. I won't apologize for protecting my interests, he said quietly, not turning around. But I'm sorry you got hurt in the process. Then he left. And Celine stood alone in her apartment, shaking with rage and grief, and the terrible understanding that she'd fallen in love with someone whose world would eventually consume her. She didn't sleep that night, just sat on her couch staring at nothing, replaying the conversation until the words lost meaning. I'm selfish enough to want something good, even if it means dragging it into darkness. At 5 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number again. Celine almost didn't answer, then something made her pick up. Hello? Miss Vale. The voice was male, unfamiliar, carrying the kind of authority that came from years of demanding answers. This is Detective James Cortez with the NYPD. I need to ask you some questions about Jae-hyun Seo. Celine's blood went cold. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. We have evidence linking Mr. Seo to multiple criminal enterprises, including the assault on Marcus Rivers. Your name appears in his calendar repeatedly over the past 3 months. Phone records show frequent communication between you. We'd like you to come in for questioning. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, but cooperation would be in your best interest. Celine's mind raced. She could refuse. Could call a lawyer. Could protect herself and Jae-hyun both by staying silent. Or she could walk away from this entire situation before it destroyed her completely. I'll think about it, she said finally. Don't think too long, Ms. Vale. People associated with Jae-hyun Seo have a tendency to disappear when investigations get serious. I'd hate for you to become a statistic. The detective hung up, and Celine sat in her apartment as morning light crept through the windows, holding a phone that suddenly felt like a grenade. She had 2 choices. Protect Jae-hyun and risk everything she'd built. or save herself and destroy the only person who'd ever made her feel visible. For 3 days, Celine avoided both decisions. She went to work, coordinated events, maintained professional composure while everything inside her felt like broken glass. Detective Cortez called twice more. She didn't answer. Jae-hyun texted once, "I know you're angry, but if anyone contacts you about me, don't say anything without a lawyer present." She didn't respond. On the 4th day, Marcus called her into his office. "We need to talk," he said, expression grave. Celine sat. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then slid a folder across his desk. "The NYPD contacted me yesterday. Asked about your relationship with Jae-hyun Seo, wanted to know if you'd ever mentioned anything about his business operations." Celine's stomach dropped. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. Because there's nothing to tell. You're a professional event coordinator who managed events for a high-profile client. That's the extent of it, as far as this company is concerned." Relief flooded through her. Then Marcus continued, "But I'm going to be direct with you, Celine. Jae-hyun Seo is bad news. I've worked in this industry long enough to know which clients operate in gray areas and which ones are genuinely dangerous. SEO is the latter. And if you're involved with him personally, you need to end it." "It's complicated." "It's not," Marcus interrupted. "You're a talented coordinator with a future in this industry. Don't destroy that for a man who will eventually drag you down with him when his world collapses, because it will collapse. Men like Seo always burn out eventually." Celine wanted to argue, wanted to defend Jae-hyun, explain that he was more than the violence and danger. But the words stuck in her throat, because Marcus was right, and she'd been naive to think loving Jae-hyun could exist separately from the consequences of his choices. That night, Celine made a decision. She texted Jae-hyun, "We need to talk, tomorrow, your place." The response came immediately. "Okay, nothing else. No questions, no attempts to control the conversation, just acceptance." And somehow that hurt worse than anything else. Celine arrived at Jae-hyun's penthouse at 7 p.m. Min let her in without comment, though she saw concern flash across his expression. The penthouse felt different now, less like a home, and more like a reminder of everything she was about to walk away from. Jae-hyun was waiting in the study. He looked tired. Shadows under his eyes, tension carved into his shoulders, still dressed in the clothes he'd probably worn all day. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Celine closed the door behind her, stood with her back against it, needing the physical barrier. "The police contacted me," she said without preamble. "They want me to come in for questioning. My boss warned me that being associated with you will destroy my career, and 3 nights ago you admitted you're selfish enough to pull me into your world knowing it would hurt me." Jae-hyun's expression didn't change. "All of that is true," he said. "So what am I supposed to do with that?" "Whatever protects you." The answer caught her off guard. "That's it? You're just going to let me walk away?" "If that's what you need." Jae-hyun's voice remained carefully neutral, but something raw flickered beneath the surface. "I meant what I said about being selfish. I wanted you knowing full well it would eventually cause problems. But I'm not selfish enough to force you to stay in a situation that destroys you." Celine felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You don't get to be noble about this. You pulled me into your world, made me care about you, and then showed me exactly how dark that world actually is. You don't get to play the martyr now." "I'm not playing anything. I'm telling you the truth. If staying with me means risking your career, your safety, your future, then you should leave. I won't hold it against you." "You won't hold it against me," Celine repeated, voice breaking. "Like this is just a business decision you're making. It's the opposite of a business decision. It's me caring about you enough to let you go instead of dragging you further into consequences you don't deserve." The words landed with devastating sincerity, and Celine realized this was worse than anger or manipulation. This was Jae-hyun genuinely trying to protect her by releasing her. "What if I don't want to leave?" she heard herself ask. Jae-hyun's expression cracked, just for a second, but long enough for her to see the fear beneath his control. "Then you're making a choice that will cost you things you can't get back." "I know." "Celine, stop protecting me from decisions I haven't made yet," she interrupted. "You told me once that you wanted honesty even when it's ugly. So here's mine. I'm terrified. Of the police investigation, of what association with you means for my career, of the violence I don't fully understand but can't ignore anymore." She stepped away from the door, moved closer to where he stood. "But I'm also angry that you think the solution is pushing me away, like I'm too fragile to handle complications. Like caring about you means I lose the ability to make my own choices. Jaehyun's hands curled into fists at his sides. What do you want me to say? I want you to fight for this, not by making decisions for me, but by trusting me enough to navigate this mess together. For a long moment, Jaehyun said nothing. Then he stepped forward and pulled her against him with enough force to steal her breath. His arms wrapped around her like he was trying to absorb her into his bones, face buried in her hair, whole body shaking with restrained emotion. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly, voice muffled. I've spent my entire life making sure I never needed anyone, never gave anyone leverage over me. And then you walked into my world and destroyed every defense I built. Celine's hands fisted in his shirt. So we figure it out together. It won't be easy. I know. People will get hurt. I know. Jaehyun pulled back just enough to cup her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. If you stay, I need you to understand something. My world doesn't forgive weakness, and caring about you openly makes us both vulnerable. I can't protect you from everything. I can't promise this ends well. I'm not asking for promises, Celine said. I'm asking for honesty and choice. Stop trying to make decisions for me and let me decide what I'm willing to risk. Something shifted in Jaehyun's expression. Acceptance, maybe, or surrender. He kissed her with an intensity that felt like desperation and promise tangled together. And Celine kissed him back, choosing risk over safety, honesty over comfort, him over everything else. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jaehyun rested his forehead against hers. There's something else you need to know. The words sent ice through Celine's veins. What? Jaehyun pulled back, tension returning to his shoulders. The text you received about Rivers, the anonymous tip. That didn't come from the police or some concerned citizen. Then who? It came from someone inside my organization. Someone who wants to destabilize my position by destroying my personal relationships. Celine's breath caught. You have a mole. Yes, and whoever it is knows about you, knows you're important to me, which means staying with me doesn't just put you in danger from police investigations or career consequences. He met her eyes directly. It puts you in the crosshairs of someone actively trying to hurt me. The information landed like a grenade, and Celine realized the choice she'd thought she was making, risk versus safety, honesty versus distance, was actually much bigger. Because this wasn't just about whether she could handle Jaehyun's complicated world. This was about whether she was willing to become a target in a war she didn't fully understand. How bad is it? She asked quietly. Bad enough that I need to find them before they do something worse than sending anonymous texts. And if you can't? Jaehyun's expression went cold in a way that reminded her exactly how dangerous he actually was. Then I'll handle it the way I handle all threats, permanently. The casual way he said it, like violence was just another problem requiring a solution, should have terrified her. Instead, it crystallized something Celine had been avoiding since the moment she'd stepped into his world. She couldn't love part of Jaehyun and reject the rest, couldn't accept the gentleness and run from the brutality. He was both, and choosing him meant choosing all of it. What do you need from me? She asked. Jaehyun studied her face, searching for something. I need you to trust me. Even when things get ugly, even when you don't understand my decisions. Can you do that? Celine thought about Detective Cortez's warning, about Marcus's advice, about the sensible, safe choice that would protect her career and keep her separate from consequences she didn't deserve. Then she thought about 11 months of silent attention, about a man who knelt beside her to clean broken glass, about honesty delivered without flinching even when it hurt. Yes, she said, and meant it. Jaehyun's expression cracked, relief flooding through before he locked it down again. Then we do this together. But you follow my lead on security. No arguments. Okay. And if I tell you to disappear, you disappear. Immediately. No questions. Jaehyun, that's non-negotiable, he interrupted. I can handle threats against me, but if someone uses you to get to me, I'll burn this entire city down. And I need to know you won't fight me on keeping you safe. The intensity in his voice made Celine's breath catch, because this wasn't control. This was fear. Raw, honest fear that something would happen to her because of him. Okay, she said quietly. I'll follow your lead. Jaehyun pulled her close again, and they stood there in his study while the city glittered beyond the windows, holding on to each other like drowning people finding solid ground. Neither of them knew it yet. But in 48 hours, everything would shatter, and the person they trusted most would be the one holding the knife. 48 hours later, Celine's world detonated. It started with a phone call at 6 a.m., Min's voice tight with controlled panic, words clipped and precise in a way that made her pulse spike instantly. "Get dressed. I'm outside your building. We need to move now." Celine was already throwing on clothes, phone pressed between shoulder and ear. "What happened?" "Jae-hyun's been arrested. Federal charges. They hit 3 of his properties simultaneously an hour ago." The words punched the air from her lungs. "Where is he?" "Federal Detention Center in Manhattan. They're denying bail." "Celine, you need to come with me right now. If they took him, they're coming for everyone associated with him." "I haven't done anything." "That won't matter if they decide to leverage you for testimony. Get out of your apartment now." Celine's hands shook as she grabbed her bag, shoved feet into boots, pulled on a coat over the wrinkled clothes she'd slept in. Her mind raced through fragmented thoughts. Jae-hyun in handcuffs, federal charges. The word testimony landing like a threat. She made it downstairs in 4 minutes. Min's car idled at the curb, black SUV with tinted windows, engine running. He leaned across and shoved the passenger door open before she even reached the vehicle. "In, now." Celine climbed in. Min pulled into traffic before her door fully closed, weaving through morning commuters with practiced aggression. "Tell me everything," Celine demanded. "RICO charges, racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering. They've been building a case for 18 months. Somebody flipped, gave them enough to get warrants for simultaneous raids across all of Jae-hyun's holdings." "Who flipped?" Min's jaw tightened. "We don't know yet. But whoever it was had deep access. Financial records, property details, communication logs. This wasn't some low-level associate selling information. This was someone close. The mole. The person who'd sent Celine that anonymous text about Marcus Rivers. They'd been building toward this the entire time." "Where are we going?" Celine asked. "Safe house in Queens. Jae-hyun's instructions were explicit. If anything happens to him, I get you somewhere secure until we know how bad this is." "I'm not hiding." "You are exactly hiding," Min interrupted, voice sharp. "Because if the feds can't get Jae-hyun to cooperate, they'll come after anyone who might have information. That includes you." "I don't have information." "Doesn't matter. They'll pressure you anyway. Threaten charges, offer immunity, make it clear your choices are testify or face conspiracy allegations yourself. And if you break, I won't." Min glanced at her, expression hard. "Everyone breaks eventually. That's why we're getting you somewhere they can't find you." The safe house turned out to be a second-floor apartment above a Korean restaurant in Flushing. Bare walls, minimal furniture, the kind of space designed for temporary occupation during emergencies. Min swept the apartment with practiced efficiency, while Celine stood in the middle of the cramped living room, trying to process the fact that 24 hours ago she'd been in Jae-hyun's arms, and now he was in federal custody facing charges that could destroy him. "You stay here," Min said, checking the locks on windows that faced a narrow alley. "Don't leave. Don't contact anyone. I'll bring you updates when I have them. I want to see him." "That's not possible right now." Min, "He's in federal detention," Min said flatly, turning to face her. "No visitors except his lawyer, and even his lawyer is having trouble getting access because they're claiming he's a flight risk." Celine's chest tightened. "How long? Could be days, could be weeks. Depends on how fast they push for arraignment." "This is insane. They can't just—" "They can," Min interrupted. "And they did, which means someone gave them everything they needed to make this stick." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Jae-hyun told me something 3 days ago. Said if anything happened to him, I should give you a message." Celine's throat constricted. "What message?" Min's expression softened, just barely, but enough to reveal actual emotion beneath the professional exterior. "He said to tell you this wasn't your fault, and that he's sorry." Then Min left, and Celine stood alone in the safe house, shaking with rage and fear and the terrible understanding that loving Jae-hyun had finally delivered exactly the consequences everyone had warned her about. The first day passed in excruciating slowness. Celine paced the small apartment, checked her phone compulsively, even though Min had told her not to contact anyone, replayed every conversation she'd had with Jae-hyun, looking for clues about who might have betrayed him. The mole had to be someone close, someone with access to financial records and property details, someone Jae-hyun trusted. Her mind circled back to the men she'd seen at his birthday party. The careful deference in how they approached him. The way they'd watched when he knelt beside her to clean broken glass. Someone in that room had been building a case against him, and she'd been too focused on her own complications to see it. Min returned at 8 p.m. with food from the restaurant downstairs and minimal updates. Arraignment scheduled for tomorrow. His lawyer thinks they'll deny bail because of flight risk concerns. Federal prosecutor is pushing hard. They want to make an example of him. Can I be there? At the arraignment? No, media will be everywhere. Your presence puts a target on you. I don't care. Jae-hyun does, Min interrupted. His exact words were, keep Celine away from the courthouse, so that's what I'm doing. Celine wanted to argue, wanted to fight against being protected like she was fragile, but exhaustion won. She ate the food Min brought, kimchi stew that tasted like nothing, and tried to sleep on the narrow couch while her mind raced through scenarios where this ended in anything other than disaster. Sleep didn't come. At 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Celine's heart hammered as she answered. Hello? Ms. Vale. Detective Cortez's voice carried smug satisfaction. I'm sorry to hear about your boyfriend's legal troubles. How did you get this number? I'm a detective. Getting numbers is what I do. He paused. I'm calling because I want to help you. I doubt that. Hear me out. Chae-hyun Seo is going down. The evidence against him is overwhelming. But you're just someone who got caught up in his world. You don't have to go down with him. Celine's grip tightened on the phone. What do you want? Cooperation. Tell us what you know about his business operations. Financial transactions you witnessed. Meetings you coordinated. Names of people who attended his events. In exchange, we'll grant you immunity from any conspiracy charges. I don't know anything about his business. I think you know more than you realize. Event coordinators see things, hear conversations. You're smart, Ms. Vale. I'm sure you noticed patterns. I coordinated parties, that's all. Cortez sighed. Let me be direct. Right now, you're a witness. But if we find evidence that you knowingly facilitated criminal activity, arranged meetings for illegal deals, coordinated events used for money laundering, you become a co-conspirator, and co-conspirators go to prison. Fear lanced through Celine's chest. I didn't facilitate anything illegal. Then prove it. Come in. Talk to us. Help us understand what you saw. Otherwise, we're forced to assume you were complicit. I need to think about it. Don't think too long. The window for cooperation closes fast. After that, you're just another defendant. Cortez hung up, and Celine sat in the dark safe house, shaking, understanding for the first time exactly how trapped she actually was. Because even if she hadn't done anything illegal, proving that required cooperation. And cooperation meant betraying Jae-hyun. The arraignment happened without her. Min returned that evening with updates delivered in clipped sentences that barely masked his fury. Bail denied. Federal prosecutor argued he's a flight risk with international connections. Judge agreed. He's being held pending trial. When's the trial? Could be months. They're still building their case. So he just sits in detention. Unless his lawyer can get the bail decision overturned, which is unlikely given the charges. Celine felt sick. Did you see him? No, but his lawyer passed along a message. Min pulled out his phone, read from a note. Tell Celine I meant what I said. This isn't her fault, and she should do whatever she needs to do to protect herself. The words landed like permission or release. He's telling me to cooperate, Celine said quietly. Min's expression remained neutral. He's telling you to survive. How you do that is your choice. What would you do? For a long moment, Min said nothing. Then, I'd protect the person who protected me. But I've been in this world long enough to understand loyalty costs everything. You haven't, so I can't tell you what choice to make. He stood to leave. Min, Celine called. Who do you think the mole is? Min's jaw tightened. I have suspicions, but no proof. Tell me anyway. Why? Because if someone betrayed Jae-hyun, they need to answer for it. Something sharp flickered across Min's expression. Approval, maybe. There's a man named David Kang. He's been with Jae-hyun for 6 years, handles financial operations, has access to everything the feds would need to build a RICO case. You think it's him? I think Kang's been acting nervous for months. Taking meetings Jae-hyun doesn't know about. Making phone calls he thinks nobody notices. Could be nothing, could be everything. Where is he now? Disappeared the day after the arrest. Nobody's seen him. which meant he was either hiding because he was guilty or dead because someone else figured out he was the leak. Celine's mind raced. I want to talk to him. Min raised an eyebrow. Why? Well, because if he's the one who did this, I want to hear him admit it before I make any decisions about what happens next. And if he is the mole, what then? Celine met Min's eyes directly. Then I want to know why. And I want him to understand what he destroyed. Min studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll see what I can do. Finding David Kang took 3 days. 3 days of Celine trapped in the safe house, pacing, thinking, replaying every conversation while rage built in her chest like pressure in a closed system. Because someone had looked Jaehyun in the eye, shared meals with him, pretended loyalty while building a case that would destroy him. And that betrayal felt almost worse than the federal charges themselves. On the 4th day, Min returned with an address. Kang's holed up in a motel in Newark. Expensive place, which means someone's paying for his protection while this plays out. The feds? Probably. Witness protection doesn't kick in until after testimony, but they'll keep valuable witnesses comfortable. Take me to him. Min hesitated. Celine, if the feds are protecting him, I don't care. Take me to him. Something in her voice must have convinced him, because Min didn't argue further. They drove to Newark in tense silence. The motel turned out to be one of those extended stay places designed for business travelers. Clean, anonymous, the kind of location where nobody asked questions as long as rent got paid. Min parked across the street. Room 304, 3rd floor, southeast corner. There's probably a federal agent watching, so we need to be smart about this. How do we get past them? We don't. You walk straight up to the door like you belong there. If anyone stops you, tell them you're Kang's girlfriend and you're worried about him. Most agents won't interfere with personal drama. And if they do, then we leave and try something else. Celine took a breath, then got out of the car. The motel lobby was empty except for a bored clerk scrolling through his phone. Celine walked past without making eye contact, found the stairs, climbed to the 3rd floor. Room 304 sat at the end of a long hallway. No obvious security, no agents standing guard. Either the feds were being subtle or Kang wasn't as valuable as Min thought. Celine knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder. David, it's Celine Vale. I know you're in there. Silence. Then footsteps. The security chain rattling. The door opened a crack. David Kang looked like he hadn't slept in days. Mid-30s, usually well-dressed, but currently wearing wrinkled clothes, eyes bloodshot, stubble darkening his jaw. He stared at Celine with something between fear and resignation. How did you find me? Does it matter? You need to leave. If anyone sees you here, I'm not leaving until you tell me why. Kang's jaw tightened. For a moment, Celine thought he'd slam the door. Instead, he stepped back and let her in. The motel room was small and depressing. Bed unmade, clothes scattered across furniture, empty takeout containers piled on the desk. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking any natural light. It looked like a prison. Kang closed the door but didn't sit, just stood with his back against it, arms crossed defensively. Why are you here? I want to hear you say it, Celine said. I want to hear you admit you betrayed someone who trusted you. You don't understand? Then explain it to me. Kang's expression cracked, exhaustion and guilt bleeding through the defensive posture. They had me, he said quietly. The feds. They'd been investigating money laundering through one of the holding companies I managed, had enough to charge me with conspiracy, told me I was looking at 20 years unless I cooperated. So you sold Jaehyun out to save yourself. I gave them financial records, property details, information about business operations I thought were legitimate. I didn't... His voice broke. I didn't know it would lead to this. They said they wanted corruption charges, maybe some tax evasion, not RICO, not something that could put him away for decades. Celine felt cold fury spreading through her chest. You must have known what information you were giving them could do. I was terrified, Kang said, voice rising. Do you understand what 20 years in federal prison means? I have a daughter. She's 8 years old. I chose her over Jae-hyun. I'd make the same choice again. The honesty in his voice was brutal, and Celine understood then that betrayal wasn't always malicious. Sometimes it was just fear choosing survival. Did you send me the text? She asked. About Marcus Rivers? Kang looked away. The feds wanted to apply pressure, make you doubt him. Thought if they could drive a wedge between you two, you might cooperate too. So you used me as leverage. I'm sorry, I didn't think it would go this far. Celine stepped closer, forcing Kong to meet her eyes. You destroyed him, you understand that? Whatever happens now, you're the reason. I know. Tears tracked down Kang's face. I know, and I hate myself for it, but I do it again because I'm not strong enough to choose anything over my daughter. The admission sat ugly between them. Celine wanted to rage at him, wanted to hurt him the way his choices had hurt Jae-hyun. But standing there, looking at a broken man who'd chosen his child over loyalty, she felt something else entirely. Understanding. Terrible, unwanted understanding. What happens now? She asked quietly. I testify. Give them everything they need to make the RICO charges stick. Then I disappear into witness protection with my daughter and spend the rest of my life knowing I destroyed someone who trusted me. And Jae-hyun goes to prison. Yes. Celine's hands curled into fists. Does he know it was you? Probably suspects, but he doesn't have proof. What if I told him? Kang's expression went flat. Then I'd be dead within a week, witness protection or not. Jae-hyun's reach is long, and his memory is longer. The statement landed without drama, just fact. Celine stood there for a long moment, weighing choices that all felt impossible. She could tell Jae-hyun, could give him the name of the person who'd betrayed him and let consequences unfold. Or she could keep this information to herself, understand Kang's choice without forgiving it, and let him disappear into protection while Jae-hyun faced trial without knowing who'd sold him out. Neither option felt right. I need to go, Celine said finally. Kang nodded. For what it's worth, I am sorry. About all of it. Celine didn't respond, just left the motel room and walked back down the hallway with her heart hammering and her mind racing through implications she wasn't ready to process. Min was waiting in the car. Well? It was him. He flipped to protect his daughter. The feds used him to build the whole case. Min's jaw tightened. Does Jae-hyun know? Not yet. Are you going to tell him? Celine stared out the window at the depressing motel exterior. I don't know, because telling Jae-hyun meant signing Kang's death warrant, and keeping the secret meant Jae-hyun faced trial without understanding who'd destroyed him. Both choices felt like betrayal. The decision got made for her 2 days later. Min showed up at the safe house at 7 a.m. with an expression that made Celine's stomach drop. What happened? Kang's dead, found in his motel room this morning, single gunshot to the head, staged to look like suicide, but nobody's buying it. Ice flooded Celine's veins. How's it? Someone got to him before he could testify, which means either the feds had a leak in their protection detail or Jae-hyun's people are better than the government gave them credit for. Jae-hyun's in federal detention. He couldn't have... He has people, Min interrupted. People loyal enough to handle problems even when he's locked up. And Kang was a problem that needed handling. Celine felt sick. Did Jae-hyun order it? Min's expression remained carefully neutral. I don't have that information. Which meant yes. Or meant Min was protecting her from confirmation she didn't want. What happens now? Celine asked quietly. The feds lose their star witness. Case gets weaker but doesn't disappear. They still have financial records and documentation. Jae-hyun's lawyer is filing for dismissal based on prosecutorial misconduct for failing to protect a key witness. It's a long shot, but worth trying. And me? You stay here until we know whether the feds are coming after you next. Kang was murdered, Celine. Someone got past federal protection to kill a witness. That same someone knows you exist, knows you matter to Jae-hyun. So until we identify who's cleaning up loose ends, you stay put. The words landed with brutal clarity. Because she wasn't just a witness anymore, she was a liability. And in Jae-hyun's world, liabilities got eliminated. The next week passed in suffocating tension. News reports covered Kang's death with speculation about organized crime and federal failures. Jae-hyun's lawyer pushed hard for dismissal. The prosecution scrambled to salvage their case without their key witness. And Celine stayed trapped in the safe house, pacing, thinking, trying to reconcile the man who'd held her gently with the man who'd probably ordered an execution. On day 9, Min arrived with different news. Bail hearing got moved up, tomorrow morning. Judges reconsidering based on the prosecution's mishandling of witness protection. Will they grant it? Maybe. Jae-hyun's lawyer is good, and with Kang dead, the case looks weaker. I want to be there. Celine, I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you I'm going to be at that courthouse tomorrow. You can drive me, or I'll find my own way. Min studied her face, then nodded once. Okay, but you follow my instructions exactly. We arrive separately. You stay in the public gallery. You don't approach Jae Hyun or his legal team, and we leave the second the hearing ends. Understood? Understood. The courthouse was a zoo. Media everywhere, cameras, reporters, satellite vans parked along the street. Protesters holding signs about corruption and justice. Federal agents moving through the crowd with obvious vigilance. Min had been right to insist on caution. They entered through a side entrance, avoided the main security crush, made it to the courtroom 10 minutes before the hearing started. Celine found a seat in the back of the public gallery, tried to make herself invisible. Then Jae Hyun was brought in. He wore an orange detention jumpsuit that looked wrong on him. Too institutional, too diminishing for someone who'd always commanded rooms through presence alone. His hands were cuffed in front of him. 2 federal marshals flanked him, but his posture remained straight, his expression controlled. And when his eyes scanned the courtroom and found Celine in the back row, something cracked across his face. Relief and fear, and something that looked almost like pain. She wanted to go to him, wanted to bridge the 20 feet of courtroom space and tell him she understood, that Kang's betrayal hadn't changed anything, that she was still choosing him even knowing what that choice cost. Instead, she stayed seated and watched the hearing unfold. The prosecution argued Jae Hyun remained a flight risk despite Kang's death. His lawyer countered that without their star witness, the case was circumstantial at best, and detention without bail was punitive rather than precautionary. The judge listened to both sides with obvious skepticism, then delivered the ruling. Bail is granted, $5 million cash. Defendant will surrender passport, submit to electronic monitoring, and remain within a 50-mile radius of Manhattan. Any violation results in immediate revocation and return to custody. The courtroom erupted. Jae Hyun's lawyer looked grimly satisfied. The prosecution team looked furious. Media in the gallery scrambled for phones to file updates. And Celine felt something loosen in her chest for the first time in 10 days. He was getting out. It wasn't freedom. Not with electronic monitoring and movement restrictions and a trial still looming, but it was something. The marshals led Jae Hyun out through a side door. His lawyer followed, already on his phone coordinating bail logistics. Min appeared beside Celine. We need to leave. Now. They exited through the same side entrance they'd used coming in, moved quickly through the crowd before media could identify them, made it to Min's car without incident. Where are we going? Celine asked. Back to the safe house. Jae Hyun's being processed for release. Should be out by tonight. He'll contact you when he's clear. I want to see him. You will. But not here. Not with federal agents and media watching every move. Celine wanted to argue, but Min was right. So she settled back into the passenger seat and waited. Jae Hyun called at 9 p.m. Are you safe? His voice sounded rough, like he hadn't slept in days. I'm fine. Are you okay? Define okay. A pause. I saw you in the courtroom. I needed to be there. Min said you went to see Kang before he died. Celine's breath caught. Yes. Why? Because I needed to hear him admit what he did. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, did he? Yes. He said the feds had him on money laundering charges, threatened him with 20 years. He had a daughter. He chose her. More silence. And you're telling me this because? Because you deserve to know the truth, even if it doesn't change anything. Jae Hyun exhaled slowly. It doesn't. He betrayed me. Reasons don't matter. They mattered to him. Then he should have thought about that before he destroyed everything I built. The coldness in Jae Hyun's voice sent a chill through Celine. Did you? She stopped, not sure she wanted the answer. Did I what? Did you order it? What happened to Kang? Long pause. If I answer that question honestly, what happens next? Celine's heart hammered. I don't know. Then maybe some things are better left uncertain. The non-answer was an answer. And Celine had to decide right then whether she could live with loving someone capable of that kind of ruthlessness. Where are you? She asked instead. My penthouse. Under house arrest for the foreseeable future with a federal monitor strapped to my ankle. Romantic, right? Can I see you? Another pause. You sure that's what you want? Yes. Then come over. Min will bring you. The call ended, and Celine sat in the safe house, staring at her phone, understanding she was about to make the final choice. Stay in Jae-hyun's world, knowing exactly what that world demanded, or walk away while she still could. Min drove her to the penthouse without comment. The building looked the same as always, pre-war elegance, doorman who nodded recognition, elevator that moved with smooth silence. But everything felt different, heavier, more final. Jae-hyun answered the door himself. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, stubble darkening his jaw, wearing comfortable clothes instead of the tailored perfection she was used to. The electronic monitor on his ankle was visible beneath the hem of his pants. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Jae-hyun stepped back. "Come in." Celine entered. The penthouse felt different too, colder somehow, like a space waiting for abandonment. "You want something to drink?" Jae-hyun asked. "No, I want you to tell me the truth." "About?" "Everything. Kang. The charges. What happens now?" Jae-hyun moved to the window overlooking Central Park, stood there with his back to her, tension carved into his shoulders. "Kang's death wasn't officially sanctioned by me," he said quietly. "I'm in federal detention. I don't have access to outside communication necessary to order a hit." "But someone close to you made that call." "Yes. Based on what they thought you'd want." "Yes." Celine stepped closer. "And if you'd had the opportunity to make that call yourself?" Jae-hyun turned to face her, and she saw brutal honesty in his expression. "I would have ordered it without hesitation. Kang destroyed everything I spent 15 years building. He put people I care about in danger. He deserved what he got." The words landed without apology. "And that doesn't bother you?" "It bothers me that it was necessary, but no. I don't lose sleep over eliminating threats." Celine felt something shift inside her chest. Not horror, not disgust, just cold understanding. "The trial starts in 3 months, Jae-hyun continued. "Without Kang's testimony, the prosecution's case is weaker, but not gone. They have financial records, documentation, enough to make some charges stick even without a star witness. My lawyer thinks we can beat the RICO counts, but some of the underlying charges will probably land. Which means I'm likely looking at 5 to 10 years, maybe less with good behavior." Celine's breath caught. 5 to 10? "That's the reality," Jae-hyun interrupted. "I built an empire through methods that were always going to catch up with me eventually. This is the price." "And us?" He moved closer, close enough that she could see exhaustion carved into his features, smell the faint scent of soap from a recent shower, feel the warmth radiating off him. "That depends on whether you can live with who I actually am, not who you hoped I might become, but exactly this: someone who orders executions to protect what's his, who operates outside legal structures, who will probably spend the next decade in federal prison." His hand came up, gentle, despite the brutal honesty in his words, and cupped her jaw. "I love you," he said quietly. "I've loved you since you managed that crisis at the Meridian Club without breaking. But loving me means choosing all of this. The violence, the consequences, the probability that I'll be gone for years and you'll be left dealing with fallout I can't protect you from." Celine's eyes burned with unshed tears. "What if I don't want to choose?" "Then you walk away, right now, and I'll handle this alone like I've handled everything else." "You'd just let me go?" "I'd hate every second of it, but yes. Because keeping you in a situation that destroys you isn't love, it's selfishness." The honesty in his voice cracked something open inside Celine's chest. She thought about the past 3 months, about Detective Cortez's warnings and Marcus's advice, and Emma telling her to choose something that was actually hers. Thought about Kang choosing his daughter over loyalty and understanding that choice even while hating it. Thought about standing in courtrooms and safe houses and motel rooms trying to figure out where safety ended and cowardice began. And realized that choosing Jae-hyun had never been about safety. It had been about refusing to live invisibly. "I'm not walking away," she said. Jae-hyun's expression cracked, relief and fear tangling together. "Celine, I'm not walking away," she repeated, stepping closer. "But I need you to stop making decisions for me. Stop trying to protect me from choices I'm capable of making myself. If I'm choosing this, I'm choosing all of it, including the hard parts. The hard parts might destroy you. Then they destroy me. But at least it'll be my choice." Jae-hyun pulled her against him with enough force to steal her breath. His arms wrapped around her like he was trying to absorb her into his bones, face buried in her hair, whole body shaking with restrained emotion. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." And for the first time in 10 days, Celine felt something solid beneath her feet. Not safety, not certainty, just choice, deliberate, dangerous, completely hers. They stood there wrapped around each other while the city glittered beyond the windows and electronic monitors tracked movements and federal cases loomed like storm clouds. Neither of them knew what came next, but for right now, this moment, they had each other. And that would have to be enough. The trial started on a gray March morning when winter hadn't quite released its grip on the city. Celine sat in the public gallery every single day, watching federal prosecutors dismantle Jae-hyun's life piece by piece. They presented financial records showing money flowing through shell companies, property deeds linked to organized crime, testimony from low-level associates who'd taken plea deals in exchange for information. Without Kang, the RICO charges looked shakier. But the underlying counts, money laundering, conspiracy, tax evasion, those stuck like tar. Jae-hyun sat at the defense table wearing expensive suits that couldn't hide the electronic monitor on his ankle or the exhaustion carved into his features. He remained composed throughout, taking notes, conferring quietly with his lawyer, never once betraying emotion. But Celine saw the toll in small details. The way his hands clenched when prosecutors showed photographs of properties he'd built from nothing. The tightness around his eyes when former associates testified against him. The careful control that looked more like survival than strength. The prosecution rested after 3 weeks. Jae-hyun's lawyer mounted a defense built on reasonable doubt, suggesting the financial records showed aggressive business practices rather than criminal conspiracy, arguing that testimony from plea bargaining witnesses was unreliable, pointing out the absence of direct evidence linking Jae-hyun to violent crimes. It was competent, but everyone in that courtroom knew the truth. Jae-hyun had built an empire through methods that existed in legal gray areas at best, and empires built on shadows eventually collapsed under scrutiny. The verdict came down on a Friday afternoon in late April. Not guilty on the RICO charges. Guilty on 3 counts of money laundering, 2 counts of conspiracy, 1 count of tax evasion. The courtroom erupted, media scrambled. The prosecution team looked grimly satisfied despite losing the bigger charges. Jae-hyun's lawyer immediately began talking about appeals, and Jae-hyun sat very still, absorbing the weight of consequences he'd probably always known were coming. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. During those 6 weeks, Celine watched Jae-hyun systematically dismantle the life he'd built. He transferred business operations to trusted associates with explicit instructions about maintaining legitimacy, sold properties that couldn't survive federal scrutiny, set up financial structures to protect people who'd been loyal to him, made arrangements for employees who'd depended on organizations that were now collapsing. It was methodical, professional, and utterly devastating to witness. They spent evenings in his penthouse, now stripped of most personal items, feeling more like a museum than a home. Jae-hyun cooked Korean food from his grandmother's recipes, moving through the kitchen with practiced efficiency that suggested muscle memory older than the life he'd built in New York. "I'm teaching you," he said one night, guiding Celine's hands through the motions of folding dumplings. "So when I'm gone, you'll remember." The casual way he said it, "when I'm gone," made Celine's throat tighten. "How long do you think you'll get?" she asked quietly. 7 to 10 years? Maybe less with good behavior. My lawyer thinks we can argue for the lower end of sentencing guidelines given the dropped RICO charges. That's still 7 years. Yes. Celine's hand stilled. And you're just accepting it. What choice do I have? Jae-hyun set down the dumpling he was folding, turned to face her. I built what I built knowing consequences existed. They caught up with me. That's how this works. You could have run. Before the arrest, you had money, connections, places you could have disappeared to, and spent the rest of my life looking over my shoulder? No. I'd rather face this head on and come out the other side than run forever. The resignation in his voice broke something inside Celine. I don't want you to go. Jae-hyun pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead that felt like goodbye, even though sentencing was still weeks away. I know, but you'll be okay without me. What if I don't want to be okay without you? Then you'll do it anyway, because you're stronger than you think. Celine wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the inevitability of him disappearing into federal prison for years. Instead, she just held on to him and tried to memorize the feeling of being close to someone who'd made her visible. Sentencing day arrived too quickly. The courtroom was packed again. Media, federal agents, people from Jae-hyun's world watching to see how this ended. Celine sat in her usual spot in the back row, hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. The judge read through the charges, the verdict, the sentencing guidelines, spoke about the seriousness of financial crimes and the need for deterrence, then delivered the sentence. 8 years in federal prison, credit for time served, eligible for parole after 5 years with good behavior. The words landed like hammer blows. 8 years. Celine felt the air leave her lungs. Jae-hyun stood motionless at the defense table. His lawyer said something about appeals. The prosecution looked satisfied. Federal marshals moved forward to take him into custody, and Jae-hyun turned, found Celine in the crowd. For 3 seconds, maybe less, their eyes met across the courtroom, and everything he couldn't say in that space was visible in his expression. Love, regret, acceptance. The terrible knowledge that sometimes caring about someone meant leaving them to survive without you. Then the marshals led him away, and Celine sat in the courtroom as it emptied around her, shaking, trying to process the fact that the man she loved would be gone for 8 years. She was 31 now. She'd be 39 when he got out. If he got out early. If he survived federal prison. If they survived this at all. The first month was the hardest. Celine went through the motions of living, showed up to work, coordinated events with mechanical precision, returned to her Brooklyn apartment every night and stared at walls that felt like they were closing in. Her boss Marcus pulled her aside after a charity gala in May. "You did good work tonight," he said carefully, "but I can see this is killing you." Celine didn't bother denying it. "I'm fine." "You're not. And I'm not saying that as your boss. I'm saying it as someone who's watched you build yourself into one of the best coordinators in this city, and I don't want to see you destroy that because of a man who's in federal prison." The bluntness should have stung. Instead, it just felt honest. "What do you want me to do?" Celine asked quietly. "Pretend I don't care about him?" "I want you to decide whether this job is still what you want. Because if it's not, if you're just going through motions waiting for him to get out, then you're wasting time you don't get back." Marcus left before she could respond, and Celine stood alone in the empty event space, surrounded by the debris of someone else's perfect evening, wondering what she actually wanted anymore. The answer came 2 weeks later from an unexpected source. Emma called on a Sunday morning, voice tight with controlled emotion. "I need you to come to Boston." "What's wrong?" "Just come. Please." Celine took the train up that afternoon, found Emma in her small apartment in Cambridge, surrounded by moving boxes and looking more exhausted than Celine had ever seen her. "I'm leaving the nonprofit," Emma said without preamble, "taking a position with an arts foundation. Better pay, better hours, actual impact instead of just navigating bureaucracy." "That's great," Celine said carefully. "So why do you look like someone died?" Emma laughed, short and bitter. "Because I spent 3 years convincing myself that staying in a job I hated was noble, that suffering through something unfulfilling meant I was making a difference. And I finally realized I was just scared to choose something better." She looked directly at Celine. "Sound familiar?" The question landed with surgical precision. "I'm not suffering through my job." "You're suffering through waiting," Emma interrupted. "Putting your entire life on hold for a man who's going to be gone for years. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying you need to decide if that's actually what you want, or if you're just scared to choose something different." Celine felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I don't know what I want anymore." "Then figure it out, because you're too smart and too capable to spend the next 8 years existing in limbo." They sat together in Emma's half-packed apartment, drinking wine and talking about choices and fear and the difference between loyalty and self-destruction. And somewhere during that conversation, Celine started understanding something fundamental. Loving Jae-hyun didn't require erasing herself. It required choosing what kind of life she wanted to build while he was gone. Celine returned to New York with a decision already forming. She gave Marcus 2 weeks' notice. "You sure about this?" he asked, looking genuinely concerned. "I'm sure I can't keep doing this. I need something that feels like mine, instead of just competence for hire." "What will you do?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." Marcus studied her face, then nodded. "You've got a good reference whenever you need it, and if you change your mind, there's always a position here." Thank you. Celine worked her final events with the same precision she'd always brought, but there was something different now, a sense of closure rather than just performance. On her last day, she cleaned out her desk and walked out of the office without looking back. It felt like shedding skin, terrifying and necessary in equal measure. She spent the next month exploring possibilities, reached out to contacts in the arts world, talked to people running small galleries and community organizations, discovered that years of coordinating luxury events had given her skills applicable to places that actually mattered to her. In June, she accepted a position with a small arts foundation in Brooklyn. The pay was less than half what she'd made before. The work was harder, more hands-on, less glamorous. But for the first time in years, Celine woke up excited about what she was building. She was allowed to visit Jaehyun once a month. The federal facility was 2 hours north of the city, concrete and razor wire, and the kind of institutional bleakness designed to strip dignity. Celine made the trip on the third Saturday of every month, sitting through security checks and waiting rooms before finally reaching the visitation area. Jaehyun looked different each time. Thinner, harder. The expensive suits replaced by prison-issue clothing that hung wrong on his frame, but his eyes remained sharp, tracking her movements with the same intensity he'd always had. Their first visit had been awkward, sitting across from each other at a small table, trying to figure out how to be honest through prison phones and under-guard surveillance. "You look good," Jaehyun said. "You're lying." "Little bit," a small smile. "How are you really?" "I left the events company. Took a position with an arts foundation." Something shifted in his expression. "Why?" "Because I needed to choose something for myself instead of just maintaining what was safe." Jaehyun's hand pressed against the glass barrier between them. "I'm proud of you." The words landed with unexpected weight. "You don't have to wait for me," he said quietly. 8 years is a long time. If you meet someone— "Don't," Celine interrupted. "Don't give me permission to leave. If I choose to leave, it'll be my choice, not something you absolved me of." "Fair enough." They talked about small things, books Jaehyun was reading in the prison library, projects Celine was working on at the foundation, careful updates that avoided the harder truths, that he was surviving violence she didn't want to imagine, that she was learning to build a life without him in it. When visiting time ended, Celine pressed her palm against the glass. Jaehyun matched the gesture from his side, and for just a moment, they pretended proximity was the same as touching. The visits became routine over the next year, monthly trips upstate, conversations through scratchy prison phones, updates delivered in careful language that avoided revealing too much to listening guards. Celine watched Jaehyun adapt to incarceration the way he'd adapted to everything else, with controlled precision and strategic patience. He took classes, avoided conflicts, built quiet alliances with people who understood that power inside prison operated on different currencies than power outside. And Celine built her own life in parallel. The Arts Foundation work consumed her in ways luxury events never had. She coordinated exhibitions for emerging artists, managed community programs bringing art education to underfunded schools, fought for grant funding and navigated bureaucracy, and discovered that making something meaningful was harder and more satisfying than making something perfect. She dated briefly, a teacher she met through foundation work who was kind and uncomplicated and completely wrong for her. They ended things amicably after 3 months. "You're still in love with someone else," he said without accusation. Celine didn't deny it, because even with Jaehyun locked away in federal prison, even with years stretching between them, she couldn't seem to stop choosing him. Time moved strangely. Some days felt endless, stretching out in exhausting sameness. Other weeks disappeared in a blur of work and visits and the slow accumulation of distance. Celine stopped checking calendars obsessively, stopped counting down years until potential parole, started living in present tense instead of future conditional. She made new friends through the foundation, reconnected with old ones she'd neglected during her luxury events years, built a social network that existed separately from Jaehyun's world. And slowly, impossibly, she started understanding something Emma had tried to tell her years ago. Choosing someone didn't mean erasing yourself. It meant building a life strong enough to survive their absence. In year 3, Jaehyun's lawyer called with news about the appeal. "We want a partial reduction," he explained. Judge agreed there were sentencing calculation errors. New sentence is 6 years total. With time served and good behavior, he could be out in 4. 4 years instead of 8, It felt like oxygen. Celine made the drive upstate that weekend outside her normal visiting schedule. Jae-hyun looked stunned when they brought him to the visitation room. "What are you doing here? Your lawyer called. I had to tell you in person that you're getting out sooner." For the first time since his arrest, Celine saw Jae-hyun's control crack completely. His head dropped forward, shoulders shaking, breath coming in ragged gasps that might have been sobs if he'd allowed them sound. 4 years, Celine said quietly. You can survive 4 years. Jae-hyun looked up, eyes red-rimmed. Can you? I already have. The rest is just continuation. Something raw crossed his expression. You shouldn't have to wait. We've had this conversation. I'm not waiting. I'm living. And part of that life includes visiting you once a month until you're out. Celine, stop trying to release me from a choice I keep making, she interrupted gently. I know what I'm doing. Trust me enough to let me do it. Jae-hyun's hand pressed against the glass. Celine matched it. And they sat there in the sterile visitation room, separated by barriers they couldn't cross, choosing each other anyway. Year 4 arrived faster than expected. Celine was 35 now. Older, sharper, more certain of herself than she'd ever been. The Arts Foundation had promoted her to Director of Programs, a position with actual authority and the ability to make real decisions about where resources went. She'd built something that mattered, not because it was prestigious or paid well or impressed people at parties, but because it was hers. Emma visited from Boston one weekend in October. You look different, she said, studying Celine over coffee. Good different. I feel different. Is it the work? Or him? Celine considered the question. Both, neither. I stopped trying to separate them. What happens when he gets out? I don't know. We'll figure it out. You're not scared? Terrified. But I've been terrified before. I survived. Emma smiled. You did more than survive. You built an entire life. And she was right. Because the person Celine had become over 4 years of Jae-hyun's absence wasn't someone waiting for rescue. She was someone who'd learned to rescue herself. Jae-hyun's parole hearing was scheduled for November. Celine sat in the hearing room watching him answer questions from the parole board with the same controlled precision he brought to everything. He spoke about rehabilitation programs he'd completed, work assignments he'd maintained, his plan for re-entering society with legitimate employment lined up through contacts who'd remained loyal. The board deliberated for 20 minutes, then granted parole effective January 15th, 3 months away. Jae-hyun looked at Celine across the hearing room, and for the first time in 4 years, she saw something other than survival in his expression. Hope. Fragile and uncertain, but real. The final 3 months crawled by with excruciating slowness. Celine coordinated everything she could control, helped Jae-hyun's lawyer finalize parole conditions, arranged for a halfway house placement that met federal requirements, confirmed employment verification through one of his former associates who'd gone legitimate. On January 14th, she couldn't sleep, just lay in her apartment staring at the ceiling, trying to prepare for seeing Jae-hyun outside prison walls for the first time in 4 years. She'd changed. He'd changed. Neither of them was the same person who'd made choices in his penthouse the night before his arrest. And Celine had no idea if what they'd built through prison phones and glass barriers would survive actual proximity. January 15th dawned cold and clear. Celine drove upstate alone, arriving at the facility 2 hours before Jae-hyun's scheduled release. She waited in the parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart hammering against her ribs. At exactly 9 a.m., the facility doors opened, and Jae-hyun walked out. He wore clothes his lawyer had arranged, jeans, a jacket, boots that looked new and uncomfortable. His hair was longer than she remembered, shot through with gray that hadn't been there before. He'd lost weight, the lean frame from before now gaunt in ways that suggested survival rather than choice. But his eyes, those were the same. Sharp, intense, finding her immediately despite the parking lot full of other people waiting for releases. Celine got out of the car. They stood 20 feet apart for a long moment. Then Jae-hyun crossed the distance and pulled her into his arms with enough force to steal her breath. He shook against her, whole body trembling with emotion he'd probably been restraining for 4 years. Celine held him tightly, feeling the sharp edges of his shoulder blades, the rapid hammer of his heart, the way he buried his face in her hair like he was trying to memorize her scent. You're real, he said, voice rough. I kept thinking you'd realize this was stupid and stop coming, but you're real. I'm real, Celine confirmed. And you're out. I'm out. They stood there in the prison parking lot, holding each other while other families had their own reunions around them. And Celine felt something settle in her chest that had been suspended for 4 years. Not completion, just continuation. The drive back to the city was quiet. Jae-hyun stared out the window like a man seeing the world for the first time. Celine watched him process freedom, the way his hands flexed against his thighs, the tension in his jaw gradually loosening, the careful control giving way to something more human. "Where am I staying?" he asked finally. "Halfway house in Queens. It's part of your parole conditions. You'll be there for 6 months minimum. And after that? After that, you figure out what kind of life you want to build." Jaehyun turned to look at her. "What if I don't know anymore?" "Then you have time to figure it out." They reached the halfway house, a converted brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, nothing like the penthouse he'd lived in before. The director checked him in with efficient professionalism, reviewed rules and curfews and mandatory check-ins. Jae-hyun absorbed it all without complaint. When the paperwork was done, Celine walked him to his assigned room. Small space with institutional furniture and a window overlooking a tree-lined street. "It's not much," she said. "It's not prison. That makes it perfect." Jae-hyun sat on the narrow bed, hands clasped between his knees. For a moment, he just breathed, then looked up at Celine with an expression that broke her heart. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Be someone worth choosing. I spent 4 years learning to survive in a cage. I don't know if I remember how to be a person outside one." Celine sat beside him. "Then we figure it out together." "You keep saying that, like it's simple. It's not simple, but it's honest." Jaehyun's hand found hers, fingers lacing together with familiar precision. "I'm not the same person I was before," he said quietly. "Prison changes you. Even when you survive it intact, pieces get left behind. I'm harder now, colder, less willing to trust anything." "I'm not the same person either," Celine replied. "I built an entire life while you were gone. Career I actually care about. Friends who don't know anything about your world. Independence? I'd forgotten I was capable of. So what does that mean for us? It means we start from where we actually are instead of where we used to be." Jaehyun studied her face, really looked at her for the first time since his release. "You're stronger," he observed. "Yes. You don't need me anymore." "No. But I still choose you." The distinction landed with quiet force, because Celine had learned the difference between need and choice over 4 years of building herself into someone who could survive alone. "Why?" Jae-hyun asked. "After everything, the arrest, the trial, 4 years of monthly visits through prison glass, why are you still here?" Celine took a breath. "Because 11 months before you got arrested, you looked at me like I was the only person in the room who mattered. And even after everything that's happened since, I've never found anyone else who made me feel that visible." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not here because I need rescuing. I'm here because I choose you, every day, knowing full well you're complicated and difficult and probably always will be. But you're mine, and I'm yours. And that's worth fighting for." Jaehyun's eyes glistened. Then he kissed her, slow and careful, like he was relearning the shape of her mouth. Celine kissed him back, tasting 4 years of separation and the fragile hope that maybe they could build something real from the wreckage. When they pulled apart, Jae-hyun rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have anything to offer you," he said quietly. "No money, no power, no penthouse overlooking Central Park. Just a halfway house room and a lot of rebuilding ahead. I don't need those things. I never did." "What do you need?" "Honesty. Partnership. Someone who sees me as capable instead of fragile." "I can do that." "Then we'll figure out the rest." They sat together in the small halfway house room while afternoon light slanted through the window. And for the first time in 4 years, the future felt possible instead of just theoretical. The next 6 months were harder than either of them expected. Jae-hyun adjusted to freedom with the same controlled precision he brought to everything, but the transition was brutal. Mandatory check-ins with his parole officer, curfews that made spontaneity impossible, the electronic monitor on his ankle tracking every movement. He found work through one of his former associates who'd gone completely legitimate, construction management, overseeing projects that built affordable housing instead of luxury developments. The pay was modest but honest, And slowly, Jae-hyun started building something that didn't require operating in shadows. Celine visited regularly but maintained her own life. The foundation work consumed her in good ways. She coordinated a major exhibition featuring immigrant artists that got covered by actual art critics, secured grant funding for programs that would run for 3 years, built something permanent instead of just perfect. They navigated re-entry together, sometimes smoothly, often with friction. Jae-hyun struggled with loss of control, with having to ask permission for basic freedoms. Celine struggled with the reality that loving someone recovering from incarceration meant patience she didn't always possess. They fought. Real fights about autonomy and trust and the difference between protection and control. But they fought honestly. And that made all the difference. One night in June, 3 months after his release, they walked through Brooklyn after dinner at a small Korean restaurant Jae-hyun had discovered. The evening was warm, the city settling into that golden hour where everything looked softer. "I never thanked you," Jae-hyun said suddenly. "For what?" "For not giving up. Most people would have walked away after the first year. You stayed for 4. Celine shrugged. "I made a choice. I don't regret it. Even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. The hard parts proved it mattered." They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Jae-hyun stopped, turned to face her on a quiet street corner while the city moved around them. "I love you," he said. "I know I've said it before, but I need you to understand what it means now. Not the person I was before, the one who had money and power and the ability to control things. This version, the one rebuilding from nothing." "I know," Celine said simply. "Do you?" Jae-hyun's expression was raw. "Because loving me now means choosing someone who has a felony record and limited prospects and a past that will always complicate things. I can't give you the life I promised before." "I don't want the life you promised before. I want this one, the honest one." Jae-hyun cupped her face with both hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Then marry me." The words landed quiet but certain. Celine's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me. Not because I can offer you anything except myself, but because I want to choose you legally, officially, in ways that can't be undone by circumstances." "Jae-hyun, I'm serious. I want to build a life with you, a real one, not based on the person I used to be, but who I actually am now." Celine stared at him, heart hammering. This wasn't a grand gesture, wasn't romance packaged for Instagram or declarations made in expensive restaurants. This was a man who'd survived federal prison asking if she'd choose him anyway. "Yes," she said. Jae-hyun's expression cracked, relief and joy flooding through. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her there on the Brooklyn street corner, both of them laughing and crying and holding on to each other like drowning people finding shore. And Celine understood then what real love actually looked like. Not rescue, not obsession, not the dramatic declarations she'd seen in movies. Just choice. Daily, deliberate, imperfect choice. They got married 3 months later in a small ceremony at City Hall. Emma came down from Boston. Min attended, looking uncomfortable in a suit. A few friends from Celine's foundation work who'd become genuine companions over the years. No media, no luxury event coordination. No guest list full of powerful people. Just the people who mattered. Jae-hyun wore a simple suit purchased from a discount store. Celine wore a dress she'd found at a vintage shop in Brooklyn. They exchanged vows in front of a clerk who'd performed hundreds of these ceremonies and probably wouldn't remember them by next week. And it was perfect. Because it was theirs. Afterward, they had dinner at Rosa's restaurant, the same hidden Italian place where they'd had their first real date. Rosa cried and kissed both their cheeks and brought out wine she claimed she'd been saving for a special occasion. "I knew," she said, wagging a finger at Jae-hyun. "I knew when you brought her here the first time. This girl, she sees you, really sees you." Jae-hyun's hand tightened around Celine's. "She does." They returned to Celine's Brooklyn apartment that night. Jae-hyun had moved in 2 months earlier when his halfway house requirement ended. The space was small, nothing like the penthouse he'd lost, but it was home in ways that expensive real estate had never been. Celine stood at the window overlooking the street, watching the city settle into night. Jae-hyun came up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. None. Even knowing what choosing me cost you? Celine turned in his arms to face him. It didn't cost me anything. It gave me something I didn't know I needed. Which was? The courage to choose myself. I was invisible before you, not because of my job or my circumstances, because I'd learned to make myself invisible. Safer that way. Less vulnerable. She touched his face gently. You looked at me like I mattered, and that forced me to look at myself the same way. Everything after, the job change, the foundation work, building an actual life instead of just maintaining competence, that all came from finally believing I deserved to be visible. Jae-hyun's eyes shone. You were always visible to me. I know. That's why I stayed. They stood there in the small Brooklyn apartment, holding each other while the city glittered beyond the windows. No bodyguards. No penthouse views. No power except what they'd built together through choosing each other repeatedly. And somehow that felt like more than anything they'd had before. Because this was real. Complicated. Difficult. Built on honesty instead of illusion. But real. A year later, Celine was promoted to executive director of the Arts Foundation. Jae-hyun had moved into project management, overseeing developments that created actual community value instead of just profit. He still carried the weight of his past, the felony record that appeared on background checks, the federal monitoring that would last years, the complicated relationship with a world he'd left behind. But he was building something legitimate, slowly, carefully, with the same precision he'd brought to everything else. They settled into rhythms that felt sustainable. Sunday mornings, with coffee and books spread across the kitchen table, Jae-hyun reading Korean history, Celine working through grant proposals, their legs tangled together in comfortable silence. Evening walks through Brooklyn where they talked about everything and nothing. The gradual accumulation of shared experiences that built relationships stronger than passion ever could. On a humid July night, Celine rested against Jae-hyun on their couch, while rain drummed against the windows. His hand rested absently on her ankle, warm and grounding, no tension left in the gesture anymore. She looked at him and realized this was what real love looked like. Not the intense beginning where everything felt urgent and desperate, not the dramatic middle where circumstances tested whether they'd survive, but this, the quiet after, where choosing someone became routine instead of heroic, where love was expressed through attention and remembering and staying instead of grand gestures. Jae-hyun caught her staring and raised an eyebrow. What? Celine smiled softly. Nothing. But her fingers curled tighter around his hand anyway, and Jae-hyun held on without hesitation, not because she needed holding, but because they'd both learned that strength wasn't surviving alone. It was choosing to survive together. They'd both been broken by circumstances they couldn't control, had both rebuilt themselves into people stronger than they'd been before. And somewhere in that rebuilding, they'd found something neither of them had known they needed. Not rescue, not completion, just partnership. Honest, imperfect, deliberately chosen partnership. The rain continued falling outside, and inside their small Brooklyn apartment, Celine and Jae-hyun sat wrapped around each other, no longer running from consequences or hiding from complications, just living, together, one deliberate choice at a time.